I hope you've enjoyed your time at SharePoint Evolution Conference so far. This afternoon, we're going to dive into one of the more interesting and forward-looking topics in the event, which is how we manage information given the new experiences that are coming out based on Office Graph, including Delve. My name is Dan Holme. I'm an Office 365 MVP based out of Hawaii. I'm the co-founder of IT Unity, which is an awesome site and community resource for all of us who are trying to solve business problems with technology.
And my name is Agnes Molnar. I am from Hungary. I am also an Office 365 MVP. I was a SharePoint Server MVP before, as I think you too.
Yep.
And I work with Search Explained, where our main focus is enterprise search.
And our goal today is really to take a very structured look at Delve and Office Graph. I know there have been other sessions at the event looking at Delve and Office Graph, looking at them from different pivots. This session is really going to dive into them so that you understand exactly what they are, how they work, but more importantly, where we're going to end up at the last slide of the presentation is actually the biggest piece of the presentation, where we really talk about the impact this has on us and our businesses, the decisions we need to make, the cultural change that it implies, the questions that businesses are asking, both the business and the end user. So we're really going to be looking at how this impacts our journey through the information jungle.
So first of all, let's talk about the reason why we need some new tools and new approaches besides the traditional enterprise search. As each of you might experience, we have more and more content and we have more and more information in every business. If we want to talk about some numbers and researches, I found a research sometime last year which said 1 year ago, and I am pretty sure it's even worse today, but it said every information worker gets the amount of 64,000 words of new information every single day. It sounds like a huge amount. If you would like to compare this to something, you should know the average length of the books on Amazon is about the same. So you get new information of a book every single day. You have to read, you have to process, you have to work with. Of course, it's impossible to read a new book and process a new book every day. So we have to find some tools, we have to find some way how to filter out what we don't need and how to focus on what we really need, so we don't get lost in this amount of information. Enterprise search can be one approach of help, but in some cases it's still not good enough. It still doesn't provide the results you want. And in many, many cases, it provides much more results than you can even process. So if you get thousands or even only hundreds of results, you cannot do anything with that. Why? If we talk about internet search like Google or Bing, and you do some search there, you get hundreds of results, it's okay. You look around, you open some results there, and you might be happy with the results. But in the enterprise, this is not the case. In the enterprise, in most cases, what you are looking for is one specific document or one specific small set of documents and not thousands or even more pieces of content. So you might feel lost in enterprise search and when you do your queries there. So the feeling might be like looking for a needle in a haystack. And you really might feel lost, and we are looking for some new ways, we are looking for some new approaches, how to do it better and how to improve the performance of everyone.
And in addition to just the sheer quantity of data in enterprise search, we're constantly fighting this challenge of the information being stored in different technical silos. And some of those silos not being indexed, some of them not being indexed well, so different calibers of experience and results. And in addition to the technical silos, we see organizations that are siloed organizationally. So the information is being held on to by a team. For whatever reasons, permissions aren't set as broadly as they need to be. The information isn't as visible as it should be across teams. So we have technical challenges and we have organizational challenges as well.
So based on this, you might see that the search as we know today is broken or at least outdated. Of course, we need enterprise search. Of course, this is a good approach, but it might be not enough. So what I prefer to talk about instead of search is findability, actually. And when we talk about findability, you will see that search is only one piece of the findability story. First, we have to start with the navigation. You can find information based on the navigation. You can even find information in the file share if you know where the document is stored. So you can go to the folder and subfolder, et cetera, and you can get to the document. This is one way to find that content. Enterprise search is definitely another way. When you enter your query, you get the results, and you can find what you need. Enterprise search is very strongly related to the accessibility of the information and permission management. So it's very important to highlight that in every single enterprise solution, you get security trimmed results, which means you get what you have access to. And you cannot see, there is no way you can see any content that you don't have access to. And this is very, very important to mention in the enterprise, because security is one of the most important value and one of the most important assets in case of the enterprise. The other, and maybe one of the most important basics of enterprise search is the information architecture. If the information architecture is poor, enterprise search and enterprise findability will be also poor, because we don't have anything, or at least we don't have good content to work with. Actually, I could talk about this approach for days, but this is not the focus of this session. But it's very important to highlight that from findability perspective, your information architecture is critically important. The next thing I would like to mention is the user experience. If the user experience is good, if your users can use refiners, if they can use the hover panel, if they get previews of the document, they might find the proper content much easier and much faster. And this might be the next key for the success of findability.
Yeah, and if you think about sort of the history of connecting users with the information they need to get their job done, this is in some ways somewhat chronological here. First, it was all about navigation and getting people to the right place on their hard drives or on a file server with a mapped drive. And then we had the page with blue links, that started with search. And then we, obviously, as Aggie mentioned, accessibility is one. We started building information architecture to make search better. We started seeing user experiences improve as FAST was integrated and the refiners and other document preview types of functionality was added. But what's been sorely missing in that whole journey so far in connecting users with the information they need is the users themselves. We've had the information, we've had indexing, we've had properties, we've had information architecture, but there still hasn't been the user. And the fact that the user's behavior and the user's interactions with information is critically important. Recently, obviously, user interaction started to come into the story with just counting against relevancy. So the idea that if something becomes more relevant if more users have clicked that link. That's sort of an obvious example of user interactions. But that's still not really the core of how information workers work. If I'm looking for something, and I know that it was something that Aggie mentioned in a meeting 3 weeks ago, I might spend 2 seconds searching for it online. But if I can't find it immediately, what do? I say, hey, Aggie, where's that thing that you showed me last week? Right? It's that relationship that's been missing, and humans still do that themselves, but what we're missing is the ability to replicate that from a technological perspective. And that's where we start to see the world heading now, is taking those kinds of interactions and those relationships into place, and also taking into account who I am as a user, so that search becomes personalized. If Aggie and I are both looking for something on budget, it might be that she's looking for the marketing budget because she's in the marketing department, and I'm looking for the engineering budget because I'm in the engineering department. And it's important to understand who we are in order to surface the information that's relevant to us. So not only the user interactions, but the user's persona, their properties, their profile, so to speak, has been sorely missing from the equation. And when you put those things together and you combine them with the advances that are happening in machine learning, that's where the world is at today. Where by taking our interactions into account, our human interactions with information and with each other, and by taking into account who we are as human beings and who we are on teams, and letting the machine start understanding those things, then search becomes more personalized, it becomes more relevant, and it's able to start surfacing information to us that's more likely to connect us with what we need to get our jobs done. And that, in the end, is really the threshold we're on today. We're on a really key threshold where findability, which is really what we should be focusing on as enterprises, is no longer just about search. It's also about discovery. It's about finding things when we don't know what we're looking for. Search is only good if you know keywords, if you know the content even exists, right? If you have to be searching for something because you know it's out there somewhere. But what about those things that you don't know are out there? What about those things that you don't know exactly how to search for them? That's where discovery comes into play. And by taking user interactions, user profile and persona, and group profile and persona information, and machine learning and putting those into place, we now have a new way to find information. And so, one of the great things that Aggie has contributed to the community is this concept of findability being more than just search. And if you think about it as a hierarchy, findability is really the service we need to be providing to our users in our enterprise so they can get their job done. And underneath that fall both search and discovery. Is there anything else you want to say on that point?
Well, just actually, what I really would like to add is not only the persona and the profile and properties of me or Dan don't only include the static properties, so to speak. So inside the machine learning, it's growing and growing. So and it also learns about our relationships. So if I work strongly with Dan, regardless of our organizational units and where we are in the organization, we get connected behind the skins, and therefore we get closer to each other in the meaning of this relationship, and we might discover content that are closer to each other too. So I might get content that is close to Dan, and then can get content that is close to me, and therefore we can learn much more about each other and much more about each other's work.
I think all of us have probably had the experience at work where we're walking by someone's desk and we look and see what they're doing. They're like, oh, that's really interesting, right? That's a very common human experience. And now this technology is at the point where it's going to start being able to replicate and enhance that exact kind of experience for us. And so with that comes Delve, which is all about discovery.
Yep, and let me show you some Delve experiences. So,
oh, and by the way, before you start, the way we're going to structure this, just so you know, is we're going to give you sort of a high-level introduction to both Delve and the Office graph so that those of you who haven't had time to figure it out yet can see how the pieces fit together. Then we're going to go deeper into both. So we're going to sort of treat this at two levels. And if you've got questions, hold them until we get to that second level, because we do want everyone to see how all the pieces fit together. And then when we go deeper into both, that's where you can surface your questions as well.
Okay, yes, so we are in the first part of this session, so I am going into the basics of Delve only now. So what you can see on this screen now is my Delve. This is my kind of production. You might see some very interesting pictures there. But basically, you can see cards. And each of those cards represent a document or a conversation. We will talk about what kind of content and how you can get content into Delve. But for now, just let me mention that those are documents on my Delve, on my board, and this is what I can see. And actually, this is really personalized. So if I log in as Agnes, I can see different things than if Dan logs in. There are several views here. And you can see, for example, if I click on myself, I can see the content I have been working on recently. But if I am logged in with a different user, I can see different content, obviously, because I worked on those content recently. Yes, and there are some other interesting things I can do. I can email a link to the document itself. I can open the document in Office Online. I can interact with the content. And of course, as soon as I open a document from here, that means immediately I have an even stronger relationship to that document. So it generates one more signal. We will talk about signals later, but it generates even stronger relationship to that content.
Yep. And actually, I think this me view is a great place to start if you're newer to the understanding of what's going on here. Because if you think about what you're seeing here, this is Agnes's interaction with content that we're seeing here. It's like an activity stream. That's exactly what it is, really, of her interactions with content in our enterprise. Whereas if we go to her homepage for Delve, we're seeing the activity stream for the enterprise, but very importantly, personalized for her. And as we go deeper into this, you'll see how it's personalized and why this becomes valuable here. So let's switch back to here. So behind Delve is Office Graph, and Office Graph is the big thing. This is the cloud service that Microsoft has invested a huge amount of R&D into, and in my personal opinion, is one of the absolute game changers for the next few years of our lives in technology. So it's a critical technology to understand. In my personal opinion, Office 365 is kind of going to live or die on the success of Office Graph. It's that important. So if you haven't started thinking about Office Graph, you should. And Office Graph, the key word there is graph. And it's not a graph like we use the word, at least in the United States, which is sort of a grid of squares. Instead, it's more like a map. And as you can see by this, it's a non-grid-like graph. And the word graph actually has roots in and tight relationships with consumer social technologies. So if you think about Facebook, for example, Facebook's core IP, intellectual property, is a graph. It knows who you are, who your friends are, what you're all talking about, what you like, and it's created almost a diagram of those things. And it's valuable to Facebook because then, based on the knowledge of who you are and what you like, they can surface ads that are more valuable to you and therefore more valuable to the advertiser than just a random ad to every single user, right? And it's the same kind of concept here. So what's happening behind the scenes is starts with the fact that in this graph there are objects called nodes that are representing people and content. And if you think of yourself in the middle of the graph here, every time you have an interaction with a person or with content, the graph learns something about you. So for example, if I'm in the middle of this graph here and I open up an Excel document, the graph keeps track of the fact that I viewed that document. If someone shares a Word document with me on their OneDrive for Business or on a team site, opens up a permission to a document library to me, that is a signal. It is something that the graph learns from, and it creates a relationship between me and that Word document. If someone emails me a message with an attachment, Exchange communicates that to the Office Graph. It's called a signal again, and the graph learns that that document was emailed to me. If I'm in a meeting and someone presents a PowerPoint presentation using PowerPoint Online, it knows that presentation was presented to me. If I'm in Yammer and there's a conversation and I like a post, that is a signal. And so there's all these behaviors, these interactions between me and content that the graph starts to understand what I'm working with. Now the graph is also getting information from other sources like Active Directory. So it starts to learn our organizational profile, the profile side of things. For example, it learns who my manager is, who my direct reports are. And it starts paying attention to who I work with based on interactions. So for example, if we're using Exchange and Aggie sends me messages and I reply, it starts to learn that I actually work with her. It keeps track of that. Now, if she sends me messages and I never reply, which she'll say happens all the time.
That never happens, of course.
Then it won't build as strong of an understanding of our relationship. But as I actually open up her messages, it says, okay, these two people actually work together. And so it's keeping track of those profile attributes, those personal attributes, those interactions with content, and it's doing that for me, and then it's doing it for everyone else in the organization as well. And so it's drawing that map of relationships between people and content, and people and other people. And just to throw a couple of bits of terminology out here, you'll hear when people talk about developing on the graph, you'll hear two main terms, which are nodes and edges. The nodes are the people and content. The edges is the fancy word for the relationship, the interaction between them. And those edges have weight. So certain things like viewing a document aren't as heavy as, for example, sharing a document with someone would be. So it's able to start building this understanding of who we are, called a graph. Whoops, sorry, Heidi.
Yes, and also based on those edges and the weights of edges, you might have stronger relationship to some people than to others. So if Dan doesn't respond my email at all, it means a very weak relationship between the two of us. Or if he responds only 2 emails of me, that's still a weak relationship based on the graph. But as soon as he starts responding my emails and we do conversations on Yammer and we co-edit some documentation, that means stronger and stronger relationship because the weight of the edge between the two of us gets higher and higher weight. And also, if you are interested in how it really works, besides the weight, the edges have a lot of other properties like timestamps and those kind of things. So if you had strong relationship with someone like 2 years ago, today that is not as important than your strong relationships today, right? So it's a very, very complex system. It's a very complex algorithm, how everything gets calculated here. But it's really important to know on this basic level is that the edges have properties too. So basically, based on that basics on Office Graph and the basic experience of Dev, what we can say is that Dev is a kind of combination of several things. It gives you the feature for discover new information, but at the same time, it's a combination of enterprise search, for example, and social. You can see that behind the scenes in the Office Graph, there is not only content. People are at least as important as the content pieces are. Because of the machine learning behind the scenes, it's also important to mention that this is a kind of intelligence. This is a kind of enterprise intelligence. This provides a kind of knowledge about your enterprise if you take the big picture of this whole graph. And this is really a kind of big data because this is getting huge, even in a small organization. But if we talk about a big organization, this graph, if you imagine, with every employee, with every piece of content, with every relationship, it can get really huge. Microsoft just published some numbers about the volume of information stored in the Office Graph recently. And what they said, during the first 6 months of Office Graph being alive, still in beta and not released for the public, so it was a kind of warm-up period of time, they have stored more than 6 billion relationships in the Office Graph globally. And since since Office Graph got already released to the public, this number goes higher and higher exponentially. So it's really huge, and it really requires huge amount of resources. This is, by the way, this is one reason why you cannot get Office Graph on premises, because you really need the resources of the cloud. So what we can see and what it can provide for us. First of all, you can find content without queries. As Dan mentioned, when you want to search, I mean the traditional way, you have to know at least something about the content. You have to be able to enter your query to the search engine. Dev provides you content that is a kind of suggestion to you that you might be interested in without entering any query. You don't have to do anything, just go to Dev and you get those suggestions. The next important thing is you can find content that is trending around you, content that other people are working on, content that is around you in the graph. So if you really imagine the graph as a real 3-dimensional thing, Dev provides you a view from your perspective in the graph as if you were the center of this graph. So this is that view that you can see. So everything that is close to you in the graph goes into and can be surfaced by Dev. This is also good if you would like to find or discover content that you didn't even know existed. So this is that experience when you walk around and find some interesting book, find some interesting paper, find some interesting content on the desk of your colleagues. You can see what they are working on, what they are interested on, and those kind of things. And last but not least, you can find colleagues. If you work in a big organization, it is also really important to be able to find colleagues by expertise or by interest. And Delve, based on the Office Graph, can help a lot with that.
Yeah, and let's actually pause at this for a second. I was thinking it might be worth going back to the demo here. Now that we've sort of seen what's behind the scenes, and we'll pause and stop for some questions here in a moment. Remember the idea that if we're on Aggie's Delve and we're looking at her Me page, this is her activity. This is what she's been sending into the Office Graph. When she goes to her home, she's now seeing, again, her view of the Office Graph. She's in the middle, and the order that these things are in is the direct result of the Office Graph. So the things that the Office Graph believes are most relevant based on recency, based on the weight of the edge, and those kinds of things that are causing the order to be presented to her in a very specific way, thus allowing her to discover content she might not otherwise see or know existed. And just to emphasize a point Aggie made earlier, all enterprise search is always based on a foundation of security. So we'll go into more about privacy later, but you will not see things that you don't have access to. So you don't have to worry about that. This is always based on that fundamental.
And what is very important to mention is that if someone else opens up my page, I mean, if someone clicks on my name like I do on one of my colleagues, this is my view of this colleague of mine.
Oh, right.
And if she opens her own page, she can get a different view with different content. First, because there might be other content close to her in the graph. Second, the permissions of her might be different, right? So maybe I can see 10 documents here. If she opens up this page, she might see more documents and different documents.
Yeah, she'll see everything she did, whereas I can only see the things she's done that I have permission to.
Yes, so we are two different nodes in the graph, therefore we have two different views in Delve.
Yep. So before we go into sort of the next level of detail, any questions just on how these pieces fit together? Is it clear so far? Yeah.
One question. Obviously, when you, so to speak, switch it on, it's already, if I remember right, it's already populated. Do you know how long Microsoft has been capturing these signals and putting this together? Because you don't want day one in to be empty, you want day one in to have value. So
yep.
How back does it go?
Microsoft turned on the Office Graph at least 12 months ago, I think. It's been quite a while. And currently, obviously, the Office Graph is only receiving signals from Office 365. So if you're only using on-prem, Delve will be empty for you on day one for sure. But if you have some stuff in Office 365, it's going to show that. Now, later on in the talk, when we get to sort of the impact on us, the real threshold for most of us is going to be the day that Microsoft releases the hybrid connectors and hybrid experiences that then allow your on-prem environments to send signals to Office Graph and for Delve on-prem to show you both environments. So we'll go into more details on that later because that will be the day that it really impacts most customers most directly.
Yes, but this is still in the future.
Yeah, that's a little bit
so
down
even
the
if
road.
you have a hybrid environment, you cannot see any signals from on-prem.
Right now, it's cloud only. Other questions so far? Yep.
What can we say about the right to be forgotten?
What about what?
The right to be forgotten.
The right to be forgotten at this point doesn't exist in an enterprise scenario. It exists in a public internet scenario, but not in an enterprise scenario. In fact, most enterprises, you don't have the right to be forgotten because it's called compliance. So I don't believe they've got a method at this point in time to remove signals or nodes from the graph. Would be something I would imagine that they would be open to feedback on.
Yes,
and so that would be the kind of thing to go to user voice and say, hey, you know, I'd like to have a way to, as an enterprise, force things out of the graph. That seems like a very reasonable request to me. And I think it's something that the more we push on through user voice, the more it's likely to happen down the road. I don't think it's something they're never going to do. It just hasn't happened yet. Yeah.
Is this only tracking or surfacing the relationships between people in the same enterprise, or are they also tracking relationships?
Good question. So his question is this only tracking things that are happening within the enterprise or externally? Right now, it's within the enterprise. But I imagine if you bring in external users, that those count in those are in your Active Directory, your Azure Active Directory, so those will be there. But it's not receiving signals from external tenancies yet.
Yes. So yes, this is all correct. Just to demonstrate, I haven't changed anything. I haven't even changed the page, switched the page. So what you can see here, there are some users are real users on this tenancy. But I have shared some content to external people. Like, for example,
like me.
I don't have any user naming Dan Holme on my tenant, right? Dan Holme is a user of IT Unity. But still, as soon as I share something with Dan, and we work together, like on this presentation, he will show up here, because he gets a node in the graph of my organization.
So I external user, become a node on her graph, but it's my interactions only with her content that she's going to see in her graph. And vice versa, if I'm doing things over in IT Unity that Aggie's been involved with, I'll see her interactions there. The two do not combine, the two graphs at this point.
So definitely you have to share your content. And first of all, you have to enable external sharing.
Yeah. All right, let's keep going, because these are good questions, but I think it'll be a little bit more easier to answer them as we go a little bit deeper here. So let's get back into here. Oh, and actually, we're going to do some more demos. So let's stay in the demo world.
All right, so more demos. So we were talking about those people here. We can see internal people here, and we can see external as soon as you share something with that people. But the question is who you can see here. Obviously, you can see people being close to you in the graph. And as soon as you search for someone here, I'm going to show you the search experience in a second. But as soon as you search someone and you uses that result, like opening a document from him or her, or interacting with him or her, he or she will get here immediately.
So it's like a most recently searched for, most recently interacted with list.
Kind of most recently interacted with and most recently worked with, and it's a combination of those things. The next thing you might see here is the boards. Boards have been only recently added to Office, to Dev, and those are a kind of Pinterest feeling. So you can tag content with those tags, so to speak. But it's very important to mention those are folksonomy and not taxonomy. So you can add any kind of name to your boards. So for example, I do have a to-do board, and you can see I have some content here. If I would like to add some content to another board, for example, this one, to search how to, I enter this one, and I get immediately my board here. If I click on the name of the board, I get this only one document. The good thing about boards is that they can be shared, which means I can send a link by email, for example, to Dan. Hey, I have just created a board. Please use it together. Of course, all security trimmed. I mean, if Dan has access to this document, he can see this on the board. Otherwise, even if he opens this board, the board will be empty for him. But of course, he can add more and more content into this board, which I can either see or not based on my permissions. So this is a very good thing. The next thing to mention, now you could see that as soon as I created the board, it got displayed here on my Delve. But it is very important to mention that everything in the Office graph takes time, which means, all right, if I send a link to Dan about this board, he gets introduced to this board. But otherwise, if he goes to Dev right now, he still cannot find this board because this board is not added to the graph itself yet, right? The same with the content. If you create a new piece of content, you have to wait a short time, actually. It's about 1 hour that it's not an official information and it's not confirmed by Microsoft, but by my experience, you have to wait about 1 hour until your content shows up in Delve, either for you or for other users, right? So it's similar to search, basically because the logic behind the scenes is the same. The content has to be crawled. But in this case, instead of search index, we have the graph, right? So don't be patient when you work with Office Graph and when you work with Delve. If you add a new content, if you modify a content, if you add a new board, it takes time. If you go back in 1 hour, 2 hours, or next day, it will be there. Don't worry, trust me. Yes, the next thing to mention here is search. We have several search experiences across Microsoft, right? We have Bing, we have SharePoint search, we have search in Outlook, and we also have a search in Delve. What is different here is that in Delve, actually we search the graph itself. So if I am starting to enter something like train, because I would like to get content regarding to trainings, I get the content that contains trainer, training, train, those kind of words, and also I get the board, even if I didn't know about that board before. So I might be interested in this one. I open this. Oops, there is no content I can see here now. But otherwise, let me show you. All right, I have switched to another board. But so if you open up a board, you can follow this board or unfollow this board, even if it's someone else's board. So for example, if I send the board to Dan, he opens it up, and if he thinks this is interesting for him, he can click on the follow, and it gets added to there. If I click on unfollow, it's hidden, right? Just check the list of boards. So it's really interesting, but again, this is taxonomy. So you can add any kind of tags. You can add multiple tags to the same thing, so this is not controlled at all. The other thing to mention is that you get a limited number of results here. You cannot turn the pages, you don't have refiner, so this is really not a new enterprise search experience. This is a discovery experience, and search inside discovery, right? So it's a totally different mindset.
Does that make sense? Because that's a really key point, the difference between the enterprise search experience and what you're getting in the Delve search experience. Okay. I think personally, in my experience so far, I like searching within the Delve experience better because what you're getting is a personalized set of results. So the odds are you're going to actually find what you want faster than doing an enterprise search. You just don't get the refiners. So if it's something you kind of know, you've had interaction with, or that's close to you, Delve is a great way to go. If you're really, truly wanting to search the enterprise and refine it down, then enterprise search is the way to go.
Exactly. So they kind of coexist.
Yep.
We cannot say use this one or that one because you should use both, actually.
And it's important to know that this is the next evolution of fast search. It was the fast search team that created Office Graph and Delve.
Okay, any question on those experiences?
You said about when you search within Delve results. Are you saying that you've got a fixed set of results, it's only those results that search?
No, you're searching the whole Office Graph, but you're only going to get one page worth of results. You don't go past that. So it's only going to pull back a limited number of results from the closest results in the graph.
Yeah, I think this number is 32 or 36 number of items. So while in enterprise search you can get hundreds or thousands of results and you can turn the pages to next, to next, to next, you cannot do this here. So you get 30 whatever results here, which is close to you in the graph, but you cannot extend it any further.
Yep. And part of a point to introduce at this point would be that Delve is simply one app with which to view the Office graph. And so it's not necessarily to say that someone couldn't create a richer search experience based on Office graph. It's just that the Delve experience, the way they've coded it, is a limited number of results. But someone could certainly go in and create a completely different pivot on whatever's in the Office graph. And there have been a couple of sessions here that looked at ways you can extend and program the Office graph.
Yes, and just to mention one example, clutter in Exchange is also based on Office graph. So if you are familiar with that and if you turn it on your tenancy, it is also based on Office graph. Question?
You'll certainly get different relevancy because of people's interactions with that content in the ensuing week, right? So like if you and I work together and I've opened that document a lot and maybe shared it with you, it's going to be higher on your list next week than it is this week. Well, you're only going to get 36 or whatever results to begin with, right? But yeah, but the idea is because if it's something that's important to you and that you work with, the odds are it's going to stay near the top because you've interacted with it, and that has a very heavy weight. And then the alternative is to use boards. And boards, you know, and one thing I've heard people say is, well, I don't like Pinterest. Don't get caught up on that metaphor. Microsoft used that metaphor because it works. A lot of people do get it. But boards are simply a collection. Right? Is you're just adding it to a collection and it's sticky. So the idea is if you have a team and there's or even as an individual, there's things you want to remember, you collect them. And you do it by tagging. And boards are simply a tag, kind of tag, folksonomic tag, that then when you click the board, you're filtering based on that tag. It's a really simple concept, and they've chosen to use words that the vast number of consumers actually get. If someone says add to a board, they probably didn't even have to use a computer to know what that is because they put things on a board in the physical world before. One other thing to point out here is that Delve as an experience is extending. So we pointed out earlier the Me page that has the activity stream for you as a user. You'll notice there's also interactions now to the user, message, call, and email. Should ring some bells. And you've got the profile of the user just in the last week or so, right? Yep. The profile has started to appear here and is starting to surface. Now, when you dig into this, at this point in time, much of the profile is still reliant on the old school user profile that's in the My Site. So when you click edit, you basically go to your My Site and it's there. But the profile is becoming a more first-class citizen. Microsoft has promised that they're going to announce some big things at Ignite about how profiles and people are dealt with. And you can see that the interaction with that profile is going to live in Delve, at least in one of the interactions with that profile will live in Delve.
And one more thing that I would mention here is that if you go back to your tenant and you try to play around and check what Delve does there, it might be different because rolling out new features takes time. So basically on this tenant, you can see the latest features. I was amongst the lucky ones, most likely. But it takes time, so maybe you have to get back tomorrow or in a week to get those latest features.
And actually, I'm going to show them one other piece of this because I think in the demo tenancy they've got one other bit that's interesting. Let me log on to it here. Hopefully it will work for us here. So this is a different demo tenancy, and let me go into, actually it takes a second to warm up here. Go into Delve. Hopefully this will show. Onto my Me page, my profile. Oh, and by the way, imagine you're doing like an expertise search and you found someone, however you have in your enterprise, whether it's traditional expertise search, whether it's a discovery like Delve, or whether someone just said, hey, you should go check out Dan. Notice there's see more related to Dan. And so you're going to start seeing content and people related to Dan. So it's a way of exploring your enterprise. But what I was really going to go into was hopefully here, notice the organization. This is our new school organization chart. We can see how people are related here. It's a pretty simple visualization at this point, but it's a nice start. And it's a way I can jump in and say, oh, you know, Dan reports to Zninka. Let me go up, jump over to her, and I get to her profile page. I can see the kinds of things that she's doing. Again, only those things that I would have access to. I can, again, continue that discovery experience. So going into the next level of Office Graph here. Let me get to that slide. We had a bunch of screenshots in case demos went bad, so we can skip through those. So delving deeper, pun intended, into the Office Graph, we've used the word signals several times, and signals are what create the edges. If you think of Office Graph as a giant database of 6 billion edges at this point in time, each edge is basically an action, some weight, timestamp, and other properties. And these are some of the actions that are currently being tracked in Office Graph. So we've mentioned things like...
Excuse me, not everything. Not yet. Sorry.
Oh, some of these aren't in there yet?
Yes.
Okay, so we've talked about share, follow, open, save, email attachments. Yeah, you're right, some of these aren't in there.
Yammer interactions.
And these are what are creating those edges. And one of the key things here is this. Microsoft has promised this year, and everyone is assuming it's going to be next week at Build, that they're going to open up the Office Graph for external signals. And that then is going to open up a tsunami of opportunity. Because if you think about, and I think Jeremy even mentioned this in either his keynote or his presentation, if you're in Dynamics CRM or Salesforce and you add a customer that you as a salesperson are dealing with, for that to be able to send a signal into the Office Graph and to find out that other people in your organization are dealing with that customer, that's an amazingly valuable thing. And so this is going to be huge. And this is also obviously what then opens up the opportunity for Microsoft to create ways for us to take our on-prem behaviors and activities and content and send signals to the Office Graph. So the hybrid story will then be opened up as well.
Also, it is important to repeat maybe that signals are the kind of triggers. Those trigger the creation of nodes and edges in the Office Graph. So you cannot find signals in the Office Graph itself because they are the event, they are the triggers that results in having new nodes and new relationships in the Office Graph. So as of today, we have several sources which can feed Office Graph with content. So those are the components, those are the systems that can send signals to Office Graph today. Of course, this list is growing and growing and has been growing actually in the last couple of weeks and months. And it is really important to mention, and we cannot highlight this enough, that there are some private and there are some public signals as well.
So, and the idea there is that some of the activities that some of the interactions I might have with content or other people might be visible only to me by the nature of that action and not visible to someone else. So the signal itself, the edge that's created by my behavior is private to me. And let me give you a scenario of that. Imagine a female employee, let's say Agnes. She's at work and she's thinking she might be pregnant. And so she goes up to the HR team site and looks at the maternity benefits document. Now, she's not even really ready to tell her husband she's pregnant, let alone her manager. So it's important that her viewing that document isn't immediately visible to other people on her team. Of course, look what happened. That's the kind of scenario that Microsoft wanted to ensure it could tell its customers there are certain behaviors that are by their very nature private. And viewing a document is a signal into Office Graph, but it creates a private edge. And so when Agnes goes and looks at her activity feed in Delve, she will see that she viewed that maternity benefits document. She can get back to it quickly. But I, as her manager, will have no visibility to that whatsoever. And so they've accounted for that. So you'll hear Microsoft talk about the fact that data, that the Office Graph is secure, meaning you only see things you have permissions to, and it's also private, meaning that there are certain types of behaviors that by the very nature of the behavior is private as well. Does that make sense?
And it's also important to mention there is no workaround. I mean, even if you use the APIs, even if you query the Office Graph from your own application, you cannot work around this.
Yep.
Private signals stay private signals.
Yeah, the only way you can get to it is with the security token of that user for whom that edge is associated. All right. So getting to sort of one of the key points in our presentation here, this is all about how this impacts us moving forward and what we all need to be thinking about. I personally think, and I know Aggie does as well, that the Office Graph particularly is the game changer for us. It is what is going to compel people to go to the cloud. We both have customers who are making decisions right now to change their roadmap to the future technologies of SharePoint 2016 in the cloud because of Office Graph and Delve. It opens up so much potential value for them. So discovery is the new paradigm. It's, search has kind of reached its end. It's now about going beyond search to discovery, taking into account personal behaviors, personal profile, team profile, and interactions with content. We talked about that. Delve is the new experience, but it is not the only experience, and that's one of the key points again. There are going to be a lot of experiences powered on Office Graph. We mentioned clutter. Office Graph is feeding information into the video portal now. What else has come out? There's obviously apps for Delve on the phone, but what else beyond Delve is there currently?
Currently,
I think that's it. But there's going to be a lot, and because it's extensible, any developer can write apps to facilitate productivity based on information in the Office Graph. The Office Graph is the new enabler, and as Microsoft opens it up to third parties, that, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be a huge tsunami of opportunity, and as Microsoft releases the pieces that will support hybrid signals into the Office Graph, that's going to be the other big thing. And their roadmap on that is this year. They haven't really made it clear whether it's part of SharePoint 2016 or whether it might come out as a separate capability. Microsoft has given very strong signals, although I don't think there's been a commitment. They've given signals that they will not only allow hybrid support for Office Graph with SharePoint 2016, but also likely SharePoint 2013 and possibly even SharePoint 2010. So that means that those of us who have existing investments in infrastructure in our on-prem environments might very well find ourselves in the very near future being able to leverage this cloud service. And just as a sort of side note as an analyst, when you hear Microsoft talking about bringing the cloud to you, which is their new mantra as opposed to dragging us to the cloud, it's about powering our on-prem experiences with cloud services. And Office Graph as a service must remain in the cloud. The compute power is huge, but we can now power our on-prem experiences with that, even potentially with down-level versions of SharePoint, which is very exciting. Integration is definitely the new opportunity. If you are an ISV or a consultant, look for ways to integrate existing systems with the Office Graph. And if you're going to invest in a new capability or tool in your organization, and you've got a choice of a vendor who has a roadmap for integration with the Office Graph versus who says, what's the Office Graph? You want to be looking at vendors who are going to integrate with the Office Graph. If you're picking a CRM system, look at who's getting ready to feed the Office Graph. If you're looking at an ERP system, look at who's getting ready to feed the Office Graph, because it will be immediately valuable to you in either a split environment where you're just using Delve in the cloud to go against Office Graph, or in a true hybrid scenario, you're going to want those third-party products to be integrating. Anything else you want to say on those points?
Yes, basically just one customer of mine came to my mind who uses Google technologies for emails, and they use Google Docs. And at the same time, they use SharePoint, and they are moving to the cloud. And they are considering to use Office Graph, and this integration is a very, very strong point for them, because the goal is to feed Office Graph from their Google applications, which is a very, very interesting story.
Yeah.
And will be very challenging as well.
Yeah, and I think we'll see a lot of that. I think we'll see a lot of Dropbox integration with Office
Yes.
Graph and other things like that. Salesforce, I would be shocked if Salesforce doesn't integrate with Office Graph like next week or the following week, personally. And then finally, adoption of this new paradigm is going to be, and information management are going to be the big challenges. As far as adoption goes, I think both Aggie and I had the experience that if a user opens up Delve, and if your Office graph actually is populated, if you're using Office 365, for example, the value becomes pretty immediately clear. The very first day that Delve hit my tenancy, I opened it up and I found 2 documents that I needed to work on that I didn't know I needed to work on. I mean, it was absolutely amazing. I was like, oh, I didn't know Eric was working on that. I guess I need to provide some input on that. It was really, truly astounding, and I think you've had some similar experiences, yeah?
Yes, actually, my very first experience was with a customer's tenant. So I had an account to that customer because of several reasons, but I logged in, I opened up Delve of that customer, and I found some information from the research group, which I found very interesting, although I didn't know that those documents did exist that time. So I checked those documents, I found them very interesting. I started a discussion with the CTO of this company, and it ended up into having more and more discussion about it, and I could provide my feedback on those researches and those kind of things. But again, it's really important to highlight, again, Dev and enterprise search and any kind of search and discovery tool is not a security leak. You can see only documents that you have access to. So I could see those research documents because I had access to those research documents, although I didn't know they were existed, right? So this is really important, but this is also a good experience.
Yep. And I think when you talk to some of the organizations that have used Delve significantly, and Microsoft obviously is at the top of that list, they use it very heavily internally. A lot of people swear by it. They basically use Delve as their homepage. So when they get to work, they can see what everyone else around them has been working on and what those people think is important. And it becomes almost like a personal portal. And I think over the next couple of weeks, we'll see some announcements from Microsoft that will further enhance the value of Delve as a starting point and as an experience for a lot of collaborative scenarios as well. And information management is obviously the other big challenge. Right now, Delve and Office Graph do not necessarily provide a taxonomy. We saw that in the example of boards. It's really a folksonomy. But I can tell you, Microsoft is very well aware that that's something that people want. And so I think over time we will see them address that scenario as well, where it's more than just someone creating a board and then sharing it with their team members, but rather that idea of a collection becomes more tied to our work as a team and also becomes something that the organization can help provide visibility to through a more controlled taxonomy. So there are definitely some places where it might not be perfectly suited for you now because it's missing some of those things. But I believe over the course of the very near future, those things will appear.
But at the same time, this approach might help the adoption because people tend to use folksonomies more often and much easier than the taxonomies.
Yeah,
Actually.
I agree. And my experience has been if you ask someone to fill in metadata on SharePoint columns on a document, they're like, pfft. But they'll add something to a board like that. Yeah, it just is a friendlier metaphor to them.
Tagging pictures on Facebook is much more popular than tagging documents in the enterprise. And this is true.
So any questions about Delve Office Graph, its impact on you, the decisions you need to make over the next 6 to 12 months?
Some documents you
Sure.
I talked to someone from Belgium, they said they can use Office 365 because Belgian law allows you to get Belgium.
Yep.
But I'm interested in on-premises, but you seem to be very negative with this.
Office Graph will never come on premise. The compute power that's required and will never come on premise. But for those scenarios where customers need to leverage the power of something like Office Graph, they're going to have the ability to send signals to Office Graph, which is different than sending the document. So from a pure compliance perspective, it doesn't matter in those scenarios. If they really look at what their laws say, they're not sending the data to the cloud.
You say you can have a hybrid environment.
You will be able to have a hybrid environment where your documents are on-prem, your interactions are on-prem, but those signals are creating information about that information. It's creating metadata in the cloud that then is being pulled back into the Delve experience on-prem for users to leverage. But the compute power remains in the cloud. Now, the second thing that's going to happen is this whole, I mean, it's not going to take years for this whole issue of geo-redundancy and geo-proprietary to even out. Microsoft is opening data centers everywhere. Organizations are starting to understand the cloud better. Announcements like they made yesterday, and if you haven't looked, go look at the security announcements they made yesterday, make Office 365 more secure than just about any customer on the planet. Microsoft now has 0 admin access. How many of you can say there's not a single administrator in your enterprise who can access data? That's where Microsoft is now. They cannot access your data without your consent. That'd be like you saying, I'm sorry, user, I can't help you troubleshoot your document because I can't get to your document. You have to consent. That's where Microsoft is at now. So the technologies and the politics and laws, those are all changing. But in the meantime, there's going to be this hybrid scenario that will help a lot of organizations. And then there'll be fringe scenarios where, they just won't want, I have customers who don't connect to any network, let alone the internet. For them, they have to do without. And that's the business choice they need to make as well. All right. Thank you guys for coming. Hope you enjoy the rest of SharePoint Conference 2015.